What happens when the person you promised forever to becomes a stranger in your own home? For Rachel Monroe, the silence was more deafening than the arguments. The polite smiles in public hid a chasm of doubt that had grown for years. She loved her husband, Julian, the man who had swept her off her feet, the father of her beautiful 4-year-old son, Leo. But a small, persistent whisper of suspicion had become a roar she could no longer ignore. It all came to a head under the sterile, unforgiving lights of a DNA clinic, a place where truths are stripped bare. She just wanted an answer, a simple confirmation to silence her fears forever. But when the pen was offered, Julian refused to sign. And in that cold, calculated refusal, a war began. Little did he know this wasn't the first paternity test he'd been involved with. And Rachel had the receipt for the one he took in secret. The air in the Evergreen Diagnostic Center was thick with unspoken anxieties. It smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a sterile purgatory for people waiting on life-altering results. Rachel Monroe sat ramrod straight, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Beside her, her 4-year-old son Leo was blissfully unaware, humming to himself as he drove a small blue toy car across the vinyl of the chair. He had his father's dark, wavy hair and her bright, curious green eyes, or so she had always believed. Across from them sat Julian Monroe, the picture of calm indignation. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't argued. He had simply complied with a chillingly detached amusement, as if this were all a tiresome game she was playing. He scrolled through his phone, a sleek black monolith that seemed to absorb all the light and warmth in his vicinity. "Rachel, this is a circus," he had murmured in the car on the way over. "You're dragging our son to a place like this based on what a feeling? It's humiliating." She hadn't responded. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in hushed, bitter arguments late at night after Leo was asleep. The arguments always followed the same pattern. She would voice a concern a late night at the office. He couldn't quite explain a strange detachment in his eyes, the way he seemed to flinch sometimes when she called him Dad in front of Leo. He would counter with cool, logical-sounding dismissals that made her feel insane. He was a master of it, turning her legitimate fears into the ramblings of a paranoid, insecure wife. Gaslighting, her therapist had called it. For Julian, it was just breathing. A technician with a practiced, weary smile called their name. Monroe Party. Rachel stood taking Leo's small, trusting hand. "Come on, sweetie." Julian rose slowly, pocketing his phone with a sigh that was pure performance. He was a handsome man. That had never been in question. Tall, with a jawline that photographers loved, and a smile that could disarm boardrooms. He was a successful investment banker who exuded an aura of effortless control. It was this control that had once made Rachel feel so safe, and now made her feel so trapped. Inside the small collection room, the technician, a kind-faced woman named Maria, explained the process. A simple, painless cheek swab for all three of them. She laid out the consent forms on the small desk. "All right, if I can just get you both to sign here and here acknowledging your consent for the paternity test," Maria said, handing a pen to Rachel first. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she signed her name. Her signature, usually a fluid script, looked jagged and foreign. She pushed the form over to Julian. He stared at it. He didn't pick up the pen. "Is there a problem, Mr. Monroe?" Maria asked, her professional smile faltering slightly. Julian looked up, not at Maria, but at Rachel. His eyes, a deep cold blue, were filled with a placid disappointment that was far more cutting than anger. "Yes, there is," he said, his voice calm and level. "I won't be signing this." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Leo's soft humming. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. "Julian, what are you doing?" "We agreed. You said you would do this to put it to rest." "I said I would come here with you." He corrected, his tone precise. "I came to show you how absurd this has become. I will not, however, participate in this theatrical validation of your insecurities. Leo is my son. I know he is. You know he is. The fact that you need a lab to tell you that is your issue, Rachel, not mine. Maria, the technician, looked deeply uncomfortable. Sir, without your consent, we can't proceed with the legal test. Exactly. Julian said, a faint, triumphant smile touching his lips. He looked at Rachel, his gaze unwavering. We're done here. Let's go home. He was cornering her publicly, shaming her, painting her as the unhinged wife in front of a stranger. Hot tears of fury and humiliation pricked at Rachel's eyes. Leo, finally sensing the tension, stopped humming and looked from his mother to his father, his lower lip beginning to tremble. No, Rachel said, her voice barely a whisper. What did you say? Julian asked, his brow furrowing with annoyance. No, she repeated louder this time, finding a core of steel she didn't know she possessed. She looked at Maria. He's refusing to sign. I can see that, ma'am, Maria said softly, a hint of pity in her eyes. Then I need a record of that refusal, Rachel stated, her voice gaining strength. I need an official document from this clinic stating that a legal paternity test was scheduled for this date and that Julian Monroe refused to provide a sample. Julian's mask of calm finally slipped. A flash of genuine anger crossed his face. Rachel, don't be ridiculous. What are you going to do with that? She ignored him, holding the technician's gaze. Can you do that for me? Maria hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, I can draft a letter of non-compliance. It will be signed by our director. Thank you, Rachel said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Julian grabbed his coat. This is insane. You've lost your mind. He turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance, his footsteps echoing down the linoleum hallway. He didn't even look at Leo. Rachel knelt down, forcing a smile for her son, who now had tears streaming down his little face. It's okay, baby. Daddy's he's not feeling well. Let's go get some ice cream. As she led Leo out of the clinic, clutching the promise of a letter that felt both like a weapon and a shield, she knew this was the end of her marriage. The public refusal wasn't just about a DNA test. It was a declaration. He was hiding something. He had been so confident she would crumble that his public shaming would be enough to make her retreat and apologize, as she had done so many times before. But he had miscalculated. He had pushed her past the point of fear and into the cold, clear territory of certainty. He was hiding a truth so profound he would rather humiliate his family than let it see the light of day. And Rachel, for the first time in a long time, was ready for a fight. The question was no longer if Leo was his son. The question was, what was Julian so desperate to conceal? The letter of non-compliance from Evergreen Diagnostic Center arrived 2 days later. It was printed on heavy, official-looking letterhead, its clinical language a stark contrast to the emotional chaos it represented. Rachel held it in her hands, the paper cool and solid. It was her first piece of tangible evidence in a war she hadn't wanted, but was now determined to win. Her first call was to Anya Sharma, a family law attorney whose name had been given to her by a friend with a quiet, "She's a shark." When Rachel explained the situation over the phone, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "He refused to sign at the clinic in front of your son?" Anya asked, her voice sharp and focused. "Yes, he said it was beneath him," Rachel replied, the humiliation still fresh. "Good?" Anya said, the single word cutting through Rachel's despair. "Men like him, arrogant, controlling, they believe they're untouchable. Their pride is their greatest weakness. It makes them sloppy. Him refusing in front of a witness is a gift, Rachel." Their first meeting took place in Anya's sleek downtown office, a space of glass steel and muted tones that felt like a command center. Anya Sharma was a petite woman with piercing dark eyes and an air of formidable intelligence. She listened without interruption as Rachel recounted the last few years of her marriage. The subtle changes, the emotional distance, the unexplained expenses, and finally the confrontation at the clinic. When Rachel finished, Anya leaned forward, her hands clasped on the polished mahogany desk. "Okay, here's where we are. His refusal gives us grounds to petition the court to compel a paternity test. It shows he is actively avoiding a resolution to a legitimate question of parentage. But I need to be honest with you, it's not a slam dunk. His lawyer will argue this is harassment, an invasion of privacy, an attempt by a scorned wife to manufacture a crisis. But it's not manufactured, Rachel insisted. He's hiding something. I believe you, Anya said calmly. But a judge needs more than belief. They need a pattern of behavior. They need evidence. She slid a notepad across the desk. I want you to go home and become an archaeologist of your marriage. I want you to dig. I want you to bank statements, credit card bills, phone records, emails, social media activity, anything that feels off. We're not just looking for an affair, Rachel. We're looking for a secret life. Men like Julian don't just have dalliances, they build entire alternate realities. That night, after putting a subdued Leo to bed, Rachel entered Julian's home office. It had always been his sanctuary, a room she rarely entered. It was meticulously organized, smelling of old leather and expensive cologne. It felt like trespassing. She started with the paper files. His desk drawers were filled with investment reports, property deeds, and tax returns. Her hands shook as she opened a folder labeled Personal Accounts. It contained statements for a credit card she didn't know he had. She scanned the lines, her heart pounding. There were charges for hotels in their own city, expensive dinners for two at restaurants he'd claimed to dislike, and a recurring monthly charge that made her breath catch. A payment of $500 every single month to a woman named Isabella Rossi. The name was unfamiliar. A quick, frantic search on her phone brought up a social media profile. Isabella Rossi was beautiful, an artist with a bohemian flair, her page filled with photos of her abstract paintings and her life in a trendy downtown loft. There were no pictures of Julian, but there were pictures of her daughter, a little girl about 1.5 years old with striking deep blue eyes. Rachel felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to grip the desk to steady herself. It was an affair, a long-term, expensive affair. The secret life Anya had spoken of was real, but the monthly payments, as damning as they were, weren't the smoking gun for paternity. They proved infidelity, but not the parentage of Leo. Julian's lawyer could spin this claim he was helping a friend, an artist, down on her luck. They would call Rachel jealous and vindictive. She sat in Julian's leather chair, the room spinning around her. She felt defeated. What was she missing? What was the piece that connected everything? She thought back to Anya's words. Their pride is their greatest weakness. It makes them sloppy. Julian was proud. He was also a planner, a meticulous, detail-oriented man who left nothing to chance in his professional life. Would he really be paying thousands of dollars a month to support another woman's child without being absolutely certain it was his? The idea seemed ludicrous. A man like Julian wouldn't invest in a stock without doing his due diligence, let alone a secret family. He wouldn't be paying that money unless he knew. And how would he know? The thought hit her like a physical blow. He would have done what he refused to do for her and Leo. He would have gotten a test. A new, frantic energy surged through her. This was the real secret. The reason he was so vehemently against a new test wasn't just to deny her peace of mind regarding Leo. It was to prevent the creation of a new DNA record, a new piece of paper that could somehow be connected to an old one. He was trying to contain a fire he had already started. She abandoned the paper files and turned to his computer. It was password protected, of course. She tried the usual: Leo's birthday, their anniversary, his mother's maiden name. Nothing. She was about to give up when she remembered a conversation from years ago. They were on vacation in Italy, and he'd been talking about his first major stock market win. He'd called it his Genesis, the moment that had created his fortune. The password was Genesis 2011. She was in. His desktop was as immaculate as his office. She went straight to his email, her hands flying across the keyboard, searching for keywords: DNA, paternity, lab, results. Nothing came up in his main inbox or sent folders. He would have been too careful for that. Then she saw the folder labeled trash. Most people assumed deleting an email made it disappear, but it just moved it. She clicked on the folder and her world tilted on its axis. There were dozens of deleted emails, mostly spam and newsletters. But one stood out. The subject line was simple, "Your case file JV8337. The sender was a lab she'd never heard of, Genesis Diagnostics. Genesis, the name of his password. The ultimate display of his arrogance, hiding the evidence behind a clue to its own existence. Her finger trembled as she clicked it open. The email was brief, a notification that his results were ready to be viewed on their secure online portal. The date on the email was 8 months ago. Rachel followed the link in the email. It led to a login page for Genesis Diagnostics. She didn't have the portal password, but there was a "Forgot Password" link. She clicked it, entering Julian's email address. A notification popped up. "A temporary password has been sent to your email." She raced back to his inbox, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. There it was, an email with a temporary password. She copied it, went back to the portal, pasted it in, and held her breath as she clicked Log In. She was looking at a PDF document, a paternity test report, but the names on the report were not Rachel Monroe and Leo Monroe. Tested parties: alleged father Julian Monroe, child Amelia Rossi, mother Isabella Rossi. Rachel's eyes scanned down the page past the genetic markers and the scientific jargon to the final devastating conclusion at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. The room went silent. The air left her lungs. Julian hadn't been worried that Leo wasn't his son. He was terrified of anyone discovering that Amelia was. His grand performance at the clinic, his refusal to sign his accusations of her paranoia, it was all a desperate, elaborate piece of theater to protect a different, more damaging secret. He had already sought the truth, but not for their family. For his other one. She printed the document, the hum of the printer, the only sound in the dead, quiet house. She printed the credit card statements with the payments to Isabella. She printed the email from Genesis Diagnostics. As the pages slid into the tray, warm to the touch, Rachel felt a strange calm settle over her. The grief was still there, a vast hollow space in her chest. But the confusion and self-doubt were gone, burned away by the white-hot certainty of the truth. Julian had built a fortress of lies around himself, and she had just found the master key. This wasn't just evidence anymore, it was ammunition. And Anya Sharma was going to know exactly how to use it. The next 2 months were a blur of legal strategy and emotional fortification. Rachel moved into the guest room, creating a physical boundary that mirrored the emotional one Julian had built years ago. He was furious about her childishness, but his anger was laced with a new palpable anxiety. He knew she had been in his office. A man that meticulous would notice a single paper out of place. He started being conspicuously kind, bringing her flowers, suggesting family outings. It was a desperate, transparent attempt to gauge what she knew and to lure her back into complacency. It was too late. Rachel and Anya Sharma worked in secret building their case. Anya was ecstatic with the evidence. "This is it, Rachel," she had said, her eyes gleaming as she laid the printed documents out on her conference table. "This is the ballgame. He didn't just refuse a paternity test for your son. He secretly took one for his other child. This doesn't just show deceit. It shows a profound breach of fiduciary and marital duty. It demonstrates a calculated pattern of behavior intended to defraud you both emotionally and financially." Anya's strategy was bold. They would proceed with the court hearing to compel a paternity test for Leo. They wouldn't reveal their hand. They would let Julian and his high-priced lawyer, a slick corporate litigator named Marcus Peterson, walk into the courtroom confident and smug. They would let them paint Rachel as hysterical and vindictive, and then at the precise right moment they would detonate the truth. "He'll be under oath," Anya explained. He'll lie because that's what he does, and we will be ready. The day of the hearing arrived on a crisp October morning. The family courtroom was an intimidating space of dark wood and high ceilings designed to make one feel small. Rachel sat beside Anya, her hands cold, her stomach in knots. Across the aisle, Julian sat with Peterson, whispering and occasionally glancing over with a look of bored condescension. He looked impeccable in a tailored navy suit, the very picture of a wronged, respectable man. In the public gallery behind him sat his mother, Margaret Monroe, a formidable woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a stern expression. Her presence was a clear show of support for her son, a move designed to intimidate Rachel. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Carol Esposito, read the petition. Ms. Sharma, your client is petitioning the court to compel Mr. Monroe to submit to a DNA test to confirm the paternity of the child Leo Monroe. Mr. Peterson, your client objects. Please state your case. Marcus Peterson stood smooth and polished. Your Honor, this is a textbook case of marital strife spilling over into baseless legal harassment. My client, Mr. Monroe, has been a devoted and loving father to his son since the day he was born. He has never once questioned his paternity. This petition is not about finding the truth. It's a weapon being wielded by Ms. Monroe to inflict emotional and public distress on her husband. It's a fishing expedition born of insecurity, and it is a waste of this court's time. He went on for 10 minutes, painting a portrait of Rachel as an unstable, jealous woman and Julian as the stoic victim. Rachel could feel Margaret Monroe's stare boring into the back of her head. She focused on her breathing just as Anya had instructed. Then it was Anya's turn. She was calm, respectful, and devastatingly precise. Your Honor, my client's desire for certainty is not a fishing expedition. It is the natural consequence of a pattern of marital breakdown caused by Mr. Monroe's secrecy and emotional withdrawal. Mr. Monroe had the opportunity to resolve this matter privately and simply. He chose not to. He chose to publicly humiliate his wife and distress his child by refusing to cooperate at a scheduled appointment. Anya presented the letter of non-compliance from Evergreen Diagnostic Center. This is not the action of a devoted and loving father, Your Honor. It is the action of a man with something to hide. Judge Esposito looked at Julian. Mr. Monroe, why did you refuse the test? Julian stood, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. Your Honor, I was insulted, deeply. The idea that my wife, the woman I love, would need a piece of paper to validate our family was an affront to everything we had built. It was a matter of principle. I am Leo's father. I have never for 1 second doubted that. So you have never felt the need to seek out a paternity test for any reason? Anya asked, her voice dangerously soft. Peterson shot to his feet. Objection, Relay Monroe. We are here to discuss a potential test for the child Leo Monroe, not indulge in hypothetical scenarios. I'll allow it, Judge Esposito said, her gaze fixed on Julian. The witness has made his principles a central part of his testimony. The question goes to credibility. You may answer, Mr. Monroe. Julian's composure was flawless. He gave a small, almost pitying smile. No, Ms. Sharma, I have never sought out a paternity test. I find the entire concept distasteful, a transactional approach to what should be a matter of love and trust. It was the lie Anya had been waiting for. No further questions for the witness at this time, Your Honor, Anya said, returning to her seat. The petitioner calls Rachel Monroe to the stand. Rachel walked to the witness box, her legs feeling like lead. Anya led her through the story of their marriage, her growing suspicions, and the confrontation at the clinic. Peterson's cross-examination was brutal. He twisted her words, portraying her as paranoid and obsessed. So, Ms. Monroe, you have no tangible evidence of infidelity? No photographs? No letters? He sneered. Rachel began, her voice faltering. Yes or no, Ms. Monroe? Do you have any direct evidence that your husband has been unfaithful? Objection, Anya said calmly. This line of questioning is irrelevant to the matter of compelling a paternity test. Sustained, the judge said. Mr. Peterson, move on. Peterson looked smug, believing he had made his point. He sat down. Redirect, Your Honor, Anya asked. The judge nodded. Anya walked towards Rachel, but her eyes were on Julian. Rachel, you testified that Mr. Monroe's refusal to take a test for Leo is part of a larger pattern of secrecy. Do you have any evidence to suggest that Mr. Monroe is not in fact opposed to the principle of paternity testing, but is merely opposed to this specific paternity test? Peterson was on his feet again. Objection. Counsel is leading the witness and repeating questions that have already been asked and answered by my client. Overruled. Judge Esposito said, her voice sharp. I want to hear the answer, Ms. Monroe. Rachel took a deep breath. Yes, I do. Anya turned to the judge. Your Honor, at this time I would like to introduce into evidence 3 documents marked as Petitioner's Exhibits A, B, and C. Anya placed the stack of papers on the clerk's desk. The clerk passed them to the judge and copies were given to Julian and his lawyer. Rachel watched as Julian's face transformed. The confident smirk vanished, replaced by a ghastly, pale shock. His hand trembled as he looked at the first page, the credit card statement showing the monthly payments to Isabella Rossi. Peterson's face tightened, his eyes darting from the paper to his client. But it was the second document that broke him. Petitioner's Exhibit B. Anya announced, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom. Is a copy of an email sent to Mr. Monroe's personal account 8 months ago from a laboratory called Genesis Diagnostics, confirming his results were ready. And Exhibit C is the result itself. Anya picked up her own copy and walked towards the witness stand, her heels clicking decisively on the floor. Mr. Monroe, she said, her voice dripping with ice. You testified under oath that you have never sought a paternity test because you find the concept distasteful. Could you please explain to the court, then, why 8 months ago you paid for and received a paternity test for a 1-year-old child named Amelia Rossi, confirming with 99.9998% certainty that you are her father? The courtroom erupted in gasps. Marcus Peterson was speechless, his mouth slightly agape. Margaret Monroe in the gallery let out a small strangled cry, her hand flying to her chest. But the most dramatic reaction came from Julian. He stared at the papers in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. The architect had been buried in the ruins of his own creation. He looked up, his eyes wide with panic, and met Rachel's gaze across the courtroom. In his eyes she saw no remorse, only the pure, unadulterated terror of being caught. Judge Esposito slammed her gavel down. Order, order in the court. She peered down from the bench, her expression grim. She looked at the documents, then at the pale, shattered man at the defendant's table. Mr. Peterson, the judge said, her voice cold as steel, you have 5 minutes to confer with your client, and when we return, Mr. Monroe had better have a damn good explanation for what appears to be perjury. The 5-minute recess felt like an eternity. Anya led Rachel to a small, windowless conference room. As the door clicked shut, Rachel's legs finally gave out. She sank into a chair, the adrenaline that had sustained her draining away, leaving a profound, shaking emptiness. You did it, Anya said, her voice soft but triumphant. You were magnificent. I feel sick, Rachel whispered. His mother. The look on her face. She needed to see, Anya said firmly. She needed to see the man her son truly is, not the facade he presents to the world. The door opened and a court bailiff poked his head in. Judge is ready for you. When they re-entered the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The air of legal debate was gone, replaced by the somber tension of a sentencing. Julian Monroe looked like a different man. His suit was rumpled, his face was ashen, and the arrogant confidence had been replaced by a raw, desperate fear. His lawyer, Marcus Peterson, looked furious and defeated. Judge Esposito stared down at Julian. Mr. Monroe, I will ask you again. Did you lie under oath to this court? Peterson stood up, his voice strained. Your Honor, my client misspoke. He was flustered under emotional distress. Save it, Mr. Peterson, the judge snapped. I'm not an idiot. Mr. Monroe, I want to hear it from you. Julian rose slowly, unsteadily. He couldn't look at Rachel. He couldn't look at his mother. He stared at a point on the far wall as if his life depended on it. Yes, he said, his voice a hoarse croak. I lied. The admission hung in the air, stark and ugly. And are you the father of the child Amelia Rossi? The judge pressed. Yes. Judge Esposito leaned back in her chair, her expression one of utter disgust. So, let me see if I understand this. You refused a paternity test for the son you raised for 4 years, claiming it was a matter of principle, all while you were secretly paying to support another child whose paternity you had confirmed with a test. You built a fortress of lies, Mr. Monroe, and you used your wife's love and your son's innocence as the bricks and mortar. You have committed perjury in my courtroom, and you have demonstrated a staggering level of deceit and moral bankruptcy. She turned to Anya. Ms. Sharma, I am granting your petition to compel a paternity test for Leo Monroe to be conducted within 48 hours with results delivered directly to this court. I am also appointing a guardian ad litem to represent the best interests of the child in all future proceedings. As for the matter of your client's perjury, she locked eyes with Julian. I will be referring this to the district attorney's office. Lying under oath is a felony. Julian swayed on his feet. Peterson put a hand on his arm to steady him. That evening, the silence in their large, perfect house was a living entity. Rachel was packing a bag for herself and Leo preparing to go to her sister Chloe's house when Julian appeared in the doorway of their bedroom. He looked broken. Rachel, he began, his voice raspy. Can we please talk? There's nothing to talk about, Julian. You talked in court. You lied. Please, he begged, and the sound was so alien coming from him that it stopped her. I need to explain. She sighed, turning to face him. Explain what? That you have a secret family, that you lied to me for years, that you stood by and let me think I was going crazy. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He stammered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Isabella, it was a mistake, a one-time thing, or so I thought. He told her the story, the words tumbling out in a messy, pathetic confession. Isabella Rossi had been a brief affair 2 years ago. When she told him she was pregnant, he panicked. He tried to convince her it wasn't his, but she was insistent. I couldn't risk it, he said, pacing the room. My career, my family, my reputation, my mother, you know how she is. The Monroes are perfect. We don't have these problems. So he'd paid for her silence. He set her up in a loft, gave her a monthly allowance, all on the condition that she never contact him directly and never reveal his name. Why the test, Julian? Rachel asked, her voice cold. If you were so sure Leo was yours without one, why did you need one for Amelia? He finally looked at her, his eyes swimming with self-pity. Because Leo was planned. He was part of our life, part of the Monroe legacy. Amelia, she was a variable, an unsecured asset. I had to know if the liability was actually mine before I committed to the payments. It was a business decision. A business decision. He had reduced his own child, a little girl with his blue eyes, to a line item on a balance sheet. The clinical cruelty of it stole Rachel's breath. And Leo, she pushed. Why were you so against testing for him? Were you ever really in doubt? He shook his head vehemently. No, never. I swear, Rachel, I always knew Leo was mine. I was terrified that if I submitted to a new test, a legal one, somehow someday, Isabella's lawyers could use it to link me to Amelia officially. It would create a new paper trail. I thought if I just refused, you'd eventually give up. I never imagined you would dig like that. He saw her not as a partner, but as a problem to be managed. "I need you to help me, Elle," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "With the DA. We can say you were overwrought, that I lied to protect your feelings. We can present a united front. We can save this." Rachel stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. The charming husband, the successful banker, the doting father, it was all a costume. Underneath was a hollow man motivated by nothing but fear and self-preservation. He wasn't sorry for the lies. He was sorry he got caught. "Save this," she repeated, her voice incredulous. "Save what Julian? This house? This sham of a marriage? There is nothing left to save." She zipped her suitcase. The sound was loud and final in the quiet room. "Where are you going?" he asked, panic rising in his voice. "I'm taking our son to a place where he won't have to breathe the same air as a liar," she said, walking past him. "As for the DA, you can tell them whatever you want. I'll be telling them the truth. It's something you should try." As she walked down the grand staircase, she heard a sound from behind her. It was the sound of Julian Monroe, the man who had everything finally and completely breaking down. But she didn't turn back. She was walking towards the truth, and she was never looking back. The day after the hearing, Rachel received a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Rachel, it's Margaret." It was Julian's mother. Her voice, usually so imperious and crisp, was thin and strained. "I need to see you, and my grandson. Can I come over to Chloe's?" Rachel hesitated. Her every instinct screamed to refuse to shield herself and Leo from the woman who had stared at her with such disdain in the courtroom. But something in Margaret's tone, a crack in the usual iron facade, made her agree. An hour later, a black town car pulled up outside Chloe's modest suburban home. Margaret Monroe emerged looking older and more fragile than Rachel had ever seen her. She was not wearing her usual perfectly tailored suit, but a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. Chloe let her in, giving Rachel a protective, questioning look. Rachel nodded, and Chloe discreetly took Leo into the backyard to play. Margaret stood awkwardly in the living room, a stark contrast to the comfortable, slightly cluttered space. "This is a lovely home," she said, her voice quiet. "What do you want, Margaret?" Rachel asked, forgoing the pleasantries. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, a sight so shocking Rachel took a step back. "I want to apologize," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I sat in that courtroom and I judged you. I believed my son. I believed you were hysterical, vindictive. I believed the lies because I wanted to, because the truth was unthinkable." She sank onto the sofa, her composure crumbling. "That man in the courtroom, that stranger who made a business decision about his own child, I don't know who that is. That is not the son I raised. He's the man I've been married to," Rachel said, her voice flat. "I know," Margaret whispered. "And for that I am so sorry. I saw the way he looked at you, the way he spoke to you. I enabled him. I always demanded perfection from him, from our family. I think I helped create the monster he became." She opened her handbag and took out a thick envelope, placing it on the coffee table. "This is not a bribe, and it is not a payoff. It is a beginning. It's for you and for Leo, to secure your independence, to find a new home, to ensure my grandson is protected. Julian has compromised the Monroe family trust, both literally and figuratively. I am taking steps to rectify that. He will be removed from the board. His access to the family funds will be controlled. He will have to face the consequences of his actions, both legally and financially." Rachel stared at the envelope, then back at Margaret. "Why are you doing this?" "Because of Leo," Margaret said, her gaze turning to the window where she could see her grandson laughing on the swing set. "He is a Monroe. The test results came back this morning, Rachel. The court just sent them. Not that I had any doubt. He is my blood, and he deserves a life of honesty and integrity, something his father has proven incapable of providing. And you deserve to be honored for protecting him. You are a better mother than I was." The confession was staggering. In one afternoon, the entire power dynamic of the Monroe family had been upended. Margaret, the unmovable matriarch, had passed her verdict, and it was not in her son's favor. "Julian will be provided for, of course," Margaret continued, her voice regaining a sliver of its old command. "And he will be expected to build a relationship with his daughter. That is his mess to clean up. But the legacy, the future of this family now rests with that little boy in the yard. And with you." When Margaret left, Rachel felt a profound shift inside her. The fight was no longer just hers. She wasn't a lone woman battling a powerful, deceitful man. She had an unlikely, formidable ally. The financial support was one thing, but Margaret's moral validation was something else entirely. It was a confirmation that she hadn't been crazy, that her fight had been righteous. Later that week, Anya called with news. The district attorney was pursuing the perjury charge against Julian. Faced with incontrovertible evidence and pressure from his own family, Julian had pleaded guilty. He would avoid jail time, but he would have a criminal record, a hefty fine, and mandatory community service. It was a public fall from grace, a permanent stain on the perfect reputation he had sacrificed everything to protect. The divorce proceedings were swift and uncontested. Julian, stripped of his power and family support, agreed to all of Rachel's terms. She received a generous settlement, sole physical custody of Leo and their family home, which she immediately decided to sell. It was a house built on lies, and she wanted a fresh start. She met Isabella Rossi once by chance at a playground a few months later. The other woman was there with Amelia, a beautiful little girl with Julian's piercing blue eyes. Their conversation was brief and awkward. Isabella apologized in her own way. "I never wanted to blow up your family," she said quietly. "I just wanted him to take responsibility." Rachel looked at the little girl, an innocent party in a war she didn't understand. "He is now," Rachel replied, and for the first time felt a pang of pity, not for herself, but for the two other lives Julian had so carelessly damaged. They were all his victims. A full year had passed, a circle of seasons that had served to both soften the sharp edges of trauma and solidify the foundations of a new life. On a sun-drenched July morning, the kind that feels full of promise, Rachel Monroe stood on the porch of a house she'd only ever seen with a realtor. The street was a picture of quiet domesticity, with ancient oak trees creating a dappled canopy over the sidewalk. It was a world away from the sterile gated community where every lawn was manicured to an identical soulless perfection. In her hand, she held not a keycard or a code, but a simple solid brass key. It felt warm from the sun. She slid it into the lock of the bright blue front door. The lock turned with a satisfying mechanical click, the sound of something new and secure beginning. "Can I open it, Mommy?" "Can I?" "Leo now." A boisterous 5-year-old bounced on the balls of his feet, his eyes wide with the momentousness of the occasion. Rachel smiled, a genuine, easy expression that reached her eyes without effort. "Go for it, sweetie. It's our door." Leo pushed it open and charged inside, his sneakers squeaking on the polished hardwood floors. "Wow! It smells like new," he shouted, his voice echoing joyfully in the empty rooms. He ran straight for the back of the house. "This is my room, the one with the big window for watching squirrels." Rachel followed him in, taking a deep, calming breath. The house smelled of fresh paint, sawdust, and possibility. Sunlight streamed through the large, unadorned windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a statement. It was a home. 4 bedrooms, a sprawling backyard with a slightly crooked fence, and a kitchen that opened into a cozy living area. It was a space designed for living, not for impressing. She walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing Leo's. She could already picture it, a comfortable sofa here, a big round dining table there for projects and family meals, shelves overflowing with books and Leo's artwork. This house had none of the cold, cavernous silence of the one she had sold. That house had felt like a museum of a perfect life, a place of marble and glass where secrets festered in the shadows. This house felt like a canvas. Her thoughts drifted back to the man who was now just a recurring appointment on her calendar. Julian. The last time she'd seen him was 2 days ago at the Sunday evening drop-off. He had pulled up in his new, less ostentatious car, his face worn with a permanent low-grade exhaustion. The arrogance was long gone, replaced by a kind of weary resignation. Their exchanges were a carefully choreographed dance of civility for Leo's sake. "He had a good weekend," Julian had said, avoiding her eyes. "We went to the Science Museum." "That's nice," Rachel had replied, helping Leo with his small backpack. "He loves the dinosaur exhibit." The silence that followed was thick with everything they could never say. She saw the flicker of something in his eyes, regret maybe, or just the bitterness of his downfall. He was trying to build a life with Isabella and Amelia, a relationship founded on an ultimatum and sustained by obligation. The perjury conviction had cost him his place on several corporate boards and made him a pariah in the financial circles he once dominated. He was a man perpetually paying a debt, and it showed. She felt no triumph in seeing him diminished, only a distant clinical pity. He was a ghost from a life that no longer felt like hers. A much different visitor had come by last week. Margaret Monroe had arrived at Chloe's apartment not in a town car but in her own sedan. In her hands was a potted hydrangea. For the new garden, she had said, a tentative smile on her face. Over the past year, the formidable matriarch had transformed. Stripped of her son's perfect facade, she had been forced to find something more authentic. She found it in being a grandmother. She now sat on the floor to build Lego towers with Leo, her laughter genuine. She and Rachel had forged a strange, quiet alliance, two women navigating the wreckage Julian had left behind. They never spoke of him, but his absence was the common ground on which their new relationship was built. Rachel paused in the center of the new living room, her fingers tracing the cover of a landscape design textbook she'd tucked into her purse. She had not only re-enrolled in her degree program, she was excelling. The work of designing gardens, of cultivating life from bare earth, felt profoundly healing. It was the perfect metaphor for her own existence, clearing away the weeds, nurturing new growth, and having the patience to wait for things to bloom. The fight that began in the DNA clinic wasn't just about paternity, it was about truth. And once she had it, she found it was a foundation upon which she could build anything. Leo ran back to her, then his face flushed with happiness. He threw his arms around her legs, hugging her tightly. "I love our new house, Mommy. It's the best one ever." Rachel knelt, wrapping him in a fierce, protective embrace. She buried her face in his soft hair, the hollow ache of anxiety that had been her constant companion for years, now blessedly absent. It was replaced by a quiet, solid sense of peace. This was real. The sunlight, the smell of new paint, the weight of her son in her arms. She hadn't just won a court case or a divorce settlement. She had won her life back. She pulled back, looking into his bright, curious green eyes, her eyes. "Me too, sweetie," she whispered, her own voice thick with an emotion she could only identify as pure joy. "Welcome home." Rachel's journey began with a simple, gut-wrenching question and ended with the total liberation of her life and her spirit. Her story is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth fighting for. It shows us that sometimes the greatest betrayals aren't loud, explosive events, but quiet, calculated deceptions that eat away at our reality. She didn't just expose a lie. She reclaimed her sanity, her strength, and the future for her son. Her victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the moment she decided to trust her own voice over the gaslighting of a man she once loved. What did you think of Rachel's incredible story of courage and resilience? Have you or someone you know ever had to fight for a truth that everyone else wanted to keep buried? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In the glittering world of New York's elite, where love is a commodity and secrets are currency, a fairy tale romance is about to be shattered. When a doting husband, a self-made millionaire, inexplicably cancels his pregnant wife's dream baby shower, he unknowingly ignites a firestorm of deception. His own mother, a woman with a will of iron and a heart of gold, steps in to right his wrongs. But in doing so, she unearths a betrayal so shocking it will tear their family apart. This isn't just a story about a canceled party. It's a tale of lies, manipulation, and the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. The September air in New York City carried the first crisp hint of autumn, a welcome reprieve from the sweltering summer. For Arabella Cartwright, however, the changing seasons were merely a backdrop to the blossoming new chapter of her own life. At 28, she was 7 months pregnant with her first child, a daughter, and married to a man who was by all accounts the city's most eligible bachelor, even after he was off the market. Remy Dunn was a name that echoed in the hallowed halls of Wall Street and graced the society pages with equal reverence. A tech mogul who had built his empire from the ground up. Remy was the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he owned it. Their love story was one for the modern age, a whirlwind romance that had culminated in a lavish wedding at the Plaza Hotel a year prior. Arabella, a curator at a boutique art gallery, had been swept off her feet by Remy's charm, his ambition, and the disarming vulnerability she occasionally glimpsed beneath his polished exterior. He had promised her the world, and for a time it seemed he had delivered it on a silver platter. Their sprawling penthouse on the Upper East Side with its panoramic views of Central Park was a testament to his success, a gilded cage she had willingly stepped into. The baby shower was meant to be the pinnacle of their pre-parental bliss. Arabella had envisioned an elegant affair, a sophisticated luncheon at the iconic Rainbow Room, a place that held sentimental value for her. It was where her own parents had celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, a memory she cherished. She wanted to be surrounded by the genuine warmth of her closest friends and family, a celebration of new life that was both intimate and grand. Remy had initially been enthusiastic, or so it seemed. "Whatever you want, my love," he'd said, kissing her forehead, as they reviewed the plans with their event planner, a formidable woman named Genevieve. "Only the best for my girls." He had insisted on footing the entire bill, a gesture that at the time Arabella had found endearing. The budget was astronomical, but Remy had brushed off her concerns with a wave of his hand. "It's a drop in the ocean, Arabella. Our daughter deserves the world." The invitations, exquisite creations of ivory cardstock with rose gold calligraphy, had been sent out weeks in advance. The menu was a carefully curated selection of delicacies, the floral arrangements a breathtaking cascade of peonies and hydrangeas. Everything was perfect, a fairy tale brought to life. The first crack in the pristine facade appeared on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before the scheduled event. Arabella was arranging a bouquet of fresh lilies in the foyer when Remy walked in, his face a mask of strained composure. He was usually the epitome of calm, his movements measured and deliberate. But today there was a frantic energy about him, a nervous twitch in his jaw that she had never seen before. "We need to talk," he said, his voice clipped. He loosened his tie, a gesture that in anyone else might have signaled relaxation, but in Remy it was a red flag. "Of course," Arabella replied, her heart giving a nervous flutter. "Is everything all right at work?" He led her into the living room, the vast expanse of glass offering a stunning, almost surreal view of the city below. He didn't sit but paced in front of the fireplace, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tailored trousers. "It's about the baby shower," he began, and Arabella's stomach clenched. "I'm afraid we have to cancel it." The words hung in the air, sharp and dissonant, like a shattered pane of glass. Arabella stared at him, convinced she had misheard. "Cancel it. Remy, what are you talking about? Everything is booked. The invitations are out." "I know, darling, and I'm so sorry," he said, finally stopping to look at her. But his eyes, usually a warm, reassuring brown, were distant, evasive. "Something's come up. A business deal, a massive one. It's happening in Singapore, and the timing it's just impossible. I have to be there." Arabella's mind reeled. A business deal? Important enough to cancel their daughter's baby shower. But can't you postpone the trip or go after the shower? "It's just one afternoon, Remy." "It's not that simple," he insisted, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "This has been in the works for months. The final negotiations are happening that same weekend. If I'm not there, the deal falls through. We're talking about a 9-figure acquisition, Arabella. It's crucial for the company. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. It wasn't just about the party, the money, or the elaborate plans. It was about the gesture, the symbolism. It was about him choosing work over this milestone, over her, over their daughter. So that's it. You're just canceling it without even discussing it with me. I am discussing it with you, he said, his tone softening as he saw her distress. He moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her. But his embrace felt hollow, a perfunctory gesture rather than a comforting one. Listen, we'll do something else when I get back. Something even bigger, I promise. A welcome home party for the baby that will put this shower to shame. Arabella wanted to believe him, to find solace in his words. But a cold knot of doubt was forming in her gut. Something felt off, a discordant note in the carefully composed symphony of their life. His explanation was plausible, yes. Remy was a man driven by his work. But this felt different. It felt rehearsed. Over the next few days, a chilling sense of unease settled over her. Remy was apologetic, showering her with gifts, a diamond tennis bracelet, a limited edition handbag, as if to fill the void left by the canceled celebration. He made the calls himself to Genevieve, the event planner, to the Rainbow Room. His voice a smooth, apologetic murmur as he dismantled the event piece by piece. He even drafted a carefully worded email to their guests, citing unforeseen and unavoidable business obligations. Arabella tried to push her suspicions aside, blaming them on pregnancy hormones, on her own disappointment. But the questions kept swirling in her mind. Why couldn't he have told her about this trip sooner? Why the sudden last-minute cancellation? And why, when she tried to talk about it, did he become so defensive, his answers so vague? The person who seemed most unfazed by the cancellation, much to Arabella's surprise, was her mother-in-law, Bellamy Dunn. Bellamy was a formidable woman, the matriarch of a family that had seen its share of ups and downs. A widow for over a decade, she had raised Remy on her own, instilling in him the fierce ambition that had propelled him to success. She was a woman of impeccable taste and unshakable resolve, her silver hair always perfectly coiffed, her designer suits a testament to her enduring elegance. Arabella had always had a good relationship with Bellamy, a respectful, if not overly close bond. She admired the older woman's strength, her sharp wit, and her unwavering devotion to her son. When Arabella called her to break the news about the baby shower, expecting sympathy, or perhaps even a stern word for Remy, Bellamy's reaction was surprisingly calm. "Men can be fools, my dear," she had said, her voice a soothing balm over the phone. "Especially when they have more money than sense. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. The most important thing is you and that precious baby girl." Arabella, desperate for an ally, had poured out her heart to her mother-in-law, voicing her doubts, her hurt, her nagging feeling that something was amiss. Bellamy listened patiently, her silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. "Remy has always been intense about his work," Bellamy said carefully. "It's what's made him who he is. But you're right to be hurt, Arabella. A baby shower is a special moment, a rite of passage. It's not something to be cast aside for a business meeting, no matter how important." A few days later, Bellamy called Arabella with a proposition. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice imbued with a newfound energy, "and I refuse to let my granddaughter's arrival go uncelebrated. If Remy is too busy to throw you a party, then I will." Arabella was taken aback. "Bellamy, you don't have to do that. It's too much trouble." "Nonsense," Bellamy declared. "It would be my absolute pleasure. And we'll do it right. No stuffy luncheons or pretentious venues. We'll have it at my estate in the Hamptons. A beautiful garden party, relaxed and elegant. What do you say?" The offer was a lifeline, a glimmer of light in the darkness that had descended upon her. The Hamptons estate, a magnificent property that had been in the Dunn family for generations, was a place of happy memories for Arabella. She and Remy had spent a magical weekend there shortly after they started dating. I don't know what to say," Arabella stammered, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Say yes," Bellamy urged. "Let me do this for you for my granddaughter, and we'll keep it a surprise for everyone. Let them think the celebration is off. It will be our little secret." The idea of a secret celebration, a quiet act of defiance against Remy's cold dismissal, appealed to Arabella's bruised heart. It was a chance to reclaim a piece of her stolen joy, to create a happy memory that was hers and hers alone. She agreed, her spirit lifting for the first time in weeks. Bellamy, true to her word, took charge with military precision. She was a whirlwind of activity, her calls and emails a flurry of arrangements. She hired a new event planner, a rising star named Isabel, who specialized in bespoke, intimate gatherings. The guest list was revised, pared down to their closest circle of friends and family, the ones who had offered genuine support and concern when they heard of the cancellation. As the days turned into weeks, Arabella found herself caught up in the excitement of the secret plan. She and Bellamy would have clandestine meetings at a quiet tea room on Madison Avenue, poring over fabric swatches and cake designs. Bellamy was a woman of impeccable taste. Her vision for the party, a perfect blend of sophistication and whimsy. She was creating a wonderland, a magical escape from the harsh realities of Arabella's life. But even as the new plans took shape, the shadow of Remy's deception loomed large. His trip to Singapore was fast approaching, and his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He was distant, preoccupied, his phone perpetually buzzing with calls and messages that he would take in another room, his voice a low, urgent murmur. When Arabella asked about the deal, his answers were evasive, couched in vague business jargon that meant nothing to her. The night before he was due to leave, Arabella tried one last time to break through the wall he had built around himself. They were lying in bed, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars outside their window. "I'm going to miss you," she said softly, tracing the outline of his jaw with her finger. "I'll miss you too." He replied, his voice thick with a strange, unreadable emotion. He pulled her closer, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "I'll be back before you know it, and I'll make this up to you, I swear." But his words, meant to be reassuring, only amplified the sense of dread that had taken root in her heart. She felt a sudden, visceral urge to tell him about Bellamy's party, to shatter the secret they were keeping from him. But something held her back. A primal instinct, a whisper of self-preservation that told her to keep this one thing for herself, to hold on to this small pocket of joy that was untainted by his lies. As she watched his plane ascend into the pre-dawn sky the next morning, a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was a tear of sadness, of confusion, but also of a burgeoning strength she hadn't known she possessed. She was no longer just Remy Dunn's wife, a beautiful accessory to his successful life. She was a mother-to-be, a woman on the verge of a profound transformation. And she was about to discover that the fairy tale she had been living was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion, one that was about to come crashing down in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The real drama, she was beginning to understand, had only just begun. The Blacktown car purred along the Long Island Expressway, leaving the relentless energy of Manhattan in its wake. Arabella stared out the window, the urban landscape gradually giving way to the manicured lawns and stately homes of the Hamptons. Beside her, Bellamy Dunn was the picture of serene confidence, her fingers tapping out a message on her phone, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Isabel has outdone herself," Bellamy said, tucking her phone into her Chanel bag. "She just sent me a photo of the marquee. It's breathtaking." Arabella managed a weak smile. "I can't thank you enough for this, Bellamy." "Really? Nonsense, dear. Family takes care of family. And today," she declared, her eyes twinkling with a mischievous light, "we celebrate." The Dunn estate, a sprawling shingle-style mansion overlooking the Atlantic, was even more beautiful than Arabella remembered. As they pulled up the long gravel driveway, she could see the marquee Bellamy had mentioned, a magnificent structure of white canvas and twinkling fairy lights, set up on the vast back lawn. The air was filled with the scent of salt and roses, and the distant sound of a string quartet warming up. It was everything Remy's party was meant to be, and yet it felt entirely different. There was a genuine warmth here, an intimacy that had been absent from the cold corporate grandeur of the Rainbow Room. Isabel, the event planner, a chic woman with a warm smile, greeted them at the door. "Everything is perfect, Mrs. Dunn," she said, her gaze shifting to Arabella. "Congratulations, you look absolutely radiant." Arabella, dressed in a flowing lavender gown that Bellamy had insisted on buying for her, felt a blush creep up her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly beautiful, celebrated. The house was filled with their closest friends and family, Arabella's parents who had flown in from Connecticut, her sister Chloe, who had been her rock through the whole ordeal, and a small circle of friends who had known her long before she became Mrs. Remy Dunn. There were no society reporters here, no business associates of Remy's looking to network. Just love, genuine and unconditional. As her mother hugged her, tears in her eyes, Arabella felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees. This was what she had wanted all along. The afternoon unfolded like a dream. The sun shone brightly, the champagne flowed sparkling cider for Arabella, and the air was filled with laughter and happy chatter. Her friends showered her with thoughtful personal gifts, a stark contrast to the extravagant impersonal offerings that had likely been purchased by Remy's assistants for the original shower. But even in this idyllic setting, the architect of her recent misery was never far from her thoughts. Remy. Where was he now? In a sterile boardroom in Singapore, closing the deal of a lifetime. Did he feel even a pang of regret for what he was missing? The first discordant note in the day's perfect harmony came from her sister Chloe. She pulled Arabella aside near a fountain overflowing with white petals, her brow furrowed with concern. "Have you heard from Remy?" Chloe asked, her voice low. "He called from the airport yesterday," Arabella replied, "and he sent a text this morning saying he'd landed safely." "Why?" Chloe hesitated, biting her lip. "It's probably nothing, but my friend Sarah, the one who works for British Airways. She was working the first-class lounge at JFK yesterday morning." Arabella's heart, which had been feeling so light just moments before, began to thud heavily against her ribs. And she saw Remy. Chloe said, her eyes filled with apology. "He wasn't alone, Arabella. He was with a woman." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A woman. What did she look like? Arabella asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah said she was tall, blonde, very polished. Chloe struggled for the right words. She said they looked cozy. They were holding hands, Arabella, and she was sure it was the Singapore flight they were boarding. The blood drained from Arabella's face. A business trip. A 9-figure acquisition. The lies, so plausible, so carefully constructed, now seemed laughably transparent. The distant, preoccupied behavior, the hushed phone calls, the evasiveness, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Did she happen to catch the woman's name? Arabella asked, her voice trembling. Chloe shook her head. I'm so sorry, Ames. I didn't want to ruin your day, but I couldn't not tell you. Arabella felt a strange, chilling calm settle over her. The hurt was there, a raw, gaping wound in her chest. But beneath it was a cold, hard anger. He hadn't just canceled their baby shower. He had canceled it to go on a romantic getaway with another woman. He had lied to her, manipulated her, and made her feel like she was going crazy for doubting him. She excused herself, retreating to a secluded part of the garden that overlooked the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, a relentless roaring rhythm that mirrored the turmoil in her soul. She took deep, shuddering breaths, her hands protectively cradling her belly. Her daughter. He had done this to their daughter, too. It was Bellamy who found her there, her face a mask of concern. Arabella. My dear, what is it? You look as if you've seen a ghost. The dam broke. The tears she had been holding back streamed down her face as she told her mother-in-law everything, Chloe's story. The woman at the airport. the sickening realization of Remy's betrayal. Bellamy listened in silence, her expression hardening with each word. The serene, elegant matriarch was gone, replaced by a woman of steel, her eyes blazing with a cold fury that startled Arabella. When Arabella had finished, her voice hoarse with sobs, Bellamy placed a comforting hand on her arm. But her voice when she spoke was laced with ice. That absolute fool, she seethed, her voice a low, dangerous growl. I knew something was wrong. I felt it in my bones. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with a speed that belied her age. There's a private investigator I've used in the past. For business matters. He's discreet, and he's the best. His name is David Chen. I'm hiring him. Now. What are you going to do? Arabella asked, wiping her eyes. I'm going to find out who this woman is, Bellamy said, her voice grim. And I'm going to find out exactly what my son is doing in Singapore. And then she looked at Arabella, her eyes softening for a moment. We are going to make him pay. The rest of the party passed in a blur for Arabella. She went through the motions, opening gifts, smiling for photos. But her mind was a million miles away, lost in a maelstrom of betrayal and heartbreak. Bellamy, however, was a master of deception. She returned to the party as if nothing had happened, her charm and grace unwavering. No one would have guessed the storm that was brewing beneath her placid surface. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed, Arabella sat with Bellamy and her own parents in the grand living room of the estate. The fire crackled in the hearth, a stark contrast to the chilling conversation that was taking place. Arabella had told her parents everything, and their shock had quickly turned to a protective rage. I'm going to kill him, her father, a gentle, unassuming man, had said, his voice shaking with anger. It was Bellamy who took control, her voice calm and measured. Anger is a luxury we can't afford right now, she said, her gaze steady. We need a plan. We need to be smart. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. That was David Chen. He's already on it. He has a contact at the airline. He's trying to get the passenger manifest for that flight. A few hours later, as Arabella was trying and failing to get some sleep in one of the lavish guest rooms, Bellamy knocked softly on her door. She was holding a tablet, her face grim in the soft glow of the screen. He got it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David found her. She handed the tablet to Arabella. On the screen was a photo of the woman from the airport, captured by CCTV footage that David had somehow managed to obtain. She was tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed, just as Chloe's friend had described. But it was the name on the file that made Arabella's blood run cold. Laura Vance. The name was sickeningly familiar. Laura Vance was a rival tech entrepreneur, a rising star in Silicon Valley, who had been making headlines for her aggressive business tactics and her stunning looks. She was Remy's direct competitor, their companies locked in a fierce battle for market share. Arabella had met her once at a charity gala. She remembered Laura's cool, appraising gaze, the way she had looked at Remy with an intimacy that had made Arabella uncomfortable even then. They're not in Singapore for a business deal, Arabella said, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with horrifying clarity. They're there, together. It gets worse, Bellamy said, her voice strained. She scrolled down the page, revealing hotel booking confirmations. They weren't staying in separate rooms in a business hotel. They were sharing a suite, the presidential suite at the Marina Bay Sands, one of the most romantic and luxurious hotels in the world. And David's preliminary financial investigation had revealed something even more shocking. Remy had recently transferred a significant amount of company stock, millions of dollars worth, into a private holding company. A company that was registered in the Cayman Islands. A company that listed Laura Vance as a majority shareholder. It wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal on a scale that Arabella could barely comprehend. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was potentially sabotaging his own company, the empire he had built from scratch. For what? For Laura Vance. What is he doing? Arabella whispered, her mind reeling from the sheer magnitude of his deception. Bellamy's face was a study in grim determination. "I don't know," she said, "but I intend to find out. And when Remy gets back from his little trip, he's not going to know what hit him." The beautiful sun-drenched day that had started with so much promise had ended in the cold, harsh reality of a nightmare. The gilded cage had been shattered, and Arabella was left standing in the ruins, her heart broken, her future uncertain. But as she looked at the fierce, protective woman beside her, she knew one thing for sure. She was not alone in this fight, and the wrath of a woman scorned was nothing compared to the fury of a mother and a mother-in-law united in their quest for justice. The unraveling had begun, and it was about to get a whole lot messier. The week that followed was the longest of Arabella's life. On the surface, she maintained a facade of normalcy. She returned to her penthouse, the opulent space now feeling cold and alien. She spoke to Remy on the phone each day, her voice a carefully calibrated mix of wifely affection and mild disappointment, a performance that deserved an Oscar. Each lie he told, every casual mention of a grueling negotiation or a late-night meeting, was a fresh stab to her already wounded heart. She would end each call and immediately relay the details to Bellamy, who was compiling a dossier of his deceit with the meticulousness of a seasoned prosecutor. Bellamy, for her part, had transformed into a veritable commander-in-chief. Her Hamptons estate had become their war room, a hub of quiet, relentless activity. David Chen, the private investigator, was proving to be worth every penny of his exorbitant fee. He was a ghost, a digital phantom, who moved through the labyrinthine world of offshore accounts and corporate espionage with terrifying efficiency. He had unearthed the full extent of Remy's financial entanglement with Lara Vance. It wasn't just a transfer of stock. Remy had been systematically funneling money into Lara's company, propping up his own competitor in a move that defied all business logic. He was sabotaging himself, bleeding his own empire dry. "It makes no sense," Arabella had said, staring at the complex flowcharts David had prepared. "Why would he destroy everything he's worked for?" "There are two things that make powerful men do stupid things," my dear Bellamy had replied, her voice laced with a weary cynicism. "Ego and obsession. And it appears my son is suffering from a terminal case of both." The final piece of the puzzle arrived via a secured email from David Chen 4 days after the baby shower. It was a short, grainy video clip covertly filmed by one of David's contacts in Singapore. The footage showed the interior of a high-end restaurant. At a secluded table, Remy and Lara were seated opposite each other. They were holding hands across the table, their heads close together. But it wasn't the intimacy that was shocking. It was the document they were signing. David had managed to get a surprisingly clear shot of the paperwork. It was a prenuptial agreement. Arabella felt the air leave her lungs. A prenup. He was planning to marry Lara Vance. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her entire marriage, their life together, their unborn child. It was all a sham, a placeholder, until he could be with the woman he truly wanted. The canceled baby shower wasn't just an excuse for a trip. It was a calculated step in his plan to exit their marriage. He had needed to be out of the country, away from her, to finalize his future with someone else. The video continued. After signing the papers, Remy had reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He had opened it to reveal a diamond ring, a gaudy, ostentatious thing that dwarfed the elegant classic diamond he had given Arabella. Lara had gasped, her face illuminated by the flash of the enormous stone. She had kissed him then, a long, passionate kiss that made Arabella's stomach churn. She couldn't watch any more. She slammed the laptop shut, a strangled sob escaping her lips. This was a level of betrayal so profound, so monstrous, that it defied comprehension. The bastard, Bellamy whispered, her face pale. For the first time, Arabella saw a flicker of pain in the older woman's eyes, the deep personal hurt of a mother who has discovered her son is a stranger. But it was quickly replaced by that familiar, steely resolve. "This changes everything," Bellamy said, her voice low and dangerous. This is no longer just about infidelity. This is about fraud. Bigamy, practically. He's planning to leave you, Arabella. And he's trying to hide his assets to ensure you and your daughter get nothing. A cold, righteous fury began to burn through Arabella's grief. He was going to discard her like she was nothing. He was going to abandon his own child. The image of his hand on her pregnant belly, the memory of his promises to make it up to her now, seemed like a grotesque mockery. "What do we do?" Arabella asked, her voice shaking but firm. "We fight," Bellamy declared. "But not in a courtroom, not yet. A public, messy divorce is what he would expect. It would get dragged out for years and he would use his money and his power to crush you. No, we are going to be smarter. We are going to hit him where he is most vulnerable." His company. Precisely, Bellamy confirmed. Remy's entire identity is tied up in Dunn Enterprises. His reputation, his power, his ego, it all stems from that glass tower on Wall Street. We are going to expose him, not just as a cheating husband, but as a fraudulent, incompetent CEO who is actively sabotaging his own company for a woman. The plan they hatched was audacious, a high-stakes corporate power play that would have made Remy himself proud. Bellamy, it turned out, was not just a society matriarch. Her late husband had left her a significant non-controlling stake in Dunn Enterprises, a fact that Remy, in his arrogance, had largely overlooked. For years she had been a silent partner, but she had a seat on the board, and more importantly, she had the respect of the other board members, old money stalwarts who had known her family for decades. Their first move was to quietly reach out to these board members, men and women who were already growing concerned about the company's erratic performance and Remy's increasingly secretive behavior. Bellamy, with Arabella by her side, arranged a series of discreet meetings in the private rooms of exclusive city clubs. Arabella at first had been nervous. What could she, an art curator, possibly contribute to these high-powered meetings? But Bellamy had insisted. "They need to see you," she had said. "They need to see the woman he has betrayed. They need to see the mother of his child. Your presence is more powerful than any financial statement." And she was right. As Arabella, her pregnancy now beautifully apparent, sat in on these meetings, she didn't have to say a word. Her quiet dignity, her visible pain spoke volumes. Bellamy would lay out the evidence David Chen had gathered, the stock transfers, the offshore accounts, the proof of Remy's financial entanglement with a direct competitor. She didn't reveal the details of the affair, framing it instead as a case of extreme and bafflingly poor judgment that was putting the entire company at risk. The board was horrified. Remy, the golden boy, the visionary leader, was acting like a reckless fool. His loyalty, which had once been solely to his company, was now compromised. The tide was turning. The whispers of a no-confidence vote began to circulate. But they needed a final, undeniable piece of evidence, a smoking gun that would leave no room for doubt. It was during this tense period of plotting and waiting that an unexpected ally emerged. A woman named Sophia Rossi, Remy's long-suffering executive assistant. Sophia was a sharp, fiercely competent woman in her late 40s who had been with Remy since the beginning. She had seen the company grow from a tiny startup to a global powerhouse, and her loyalty to Dunn Enterprises was absolute. Bellamy, sensing a potential ally, had invited Sophia for lunch, under the guise of discussing Remy's schedule. Over salads at a quiet restaurant, Bellamy had carefully broached the subject of the company's recent troubles. Sophia, a woman who was normally the soul of discretion, surprised them both. Her composure cracked and her frustration poured out. She spoke of Remy's recent erratic behavior, his inexplicable and secretive trips, his new obsession with Laura Vance, whom Sophia clearly despised. "He's not the man I used to work for." Sophia confided, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "He's arrogant, dismissive. He's lying to everyone, including the board, and he's running this company into the ground." Seeing an opening, Bellamy took a gamble. She told Sophia everything. She showed her the evidence of the financial fraud, the photos of Remy and Laura, even the video of the proposal. Sophia's face went white with shock, which quickly morphed into a furious, resolute anger. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew he was lying. The Singapore deal. He made me book the flights. And the hotel. The presidential suite. He told me it was to impress the investors. Her eyes hardened. He's a fool. And he's going to destroy everything we built. That afternoon, Sophia Rossi made a decision. Her loyalty was not to Remy Dunn the man, but to Dunn Enterprises, the company she had dedicated her life to. She became their inside woman, their spy in the enemy camp. She gave them the final piece of the puzzle they needed. Remy in his hubris had drafted a memorandum of understanding with Lara Vance's company. It was essentially a merger agreement, but one that was shockingly disadvantageous to Dunn Enterprises. It would give Lara's company access to Dunn's proprietary technology and client lists, effectively handing over the keys to the kingdom. He was planning to present it at a specially convened board meeting the day after he returned from Singapore. He believed he had enough support to push it through, and once it was signed, he would announce his engagement to Lara and file for divorce from Arabella. It was his endgame. He's kept the only copy on a password-protected drive in his office safe, Sophia told them. But I know the password. He uses the same one for everything. The name of his first dog. Barnaby. The plan was set. The night before Remy was due to return, Sophia would access the safe, download the memorandum, and email it to Bellamy. Bellamy would then forward it to the entire board along with a formal request for an emergency meeting to discuss the immediate removal of Remy Dunn as CEO. As the day of Remy's return dawned, a nervous electric energy filled the air. Arabella felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. The life she had known was about to be obliterated, and what would rise from the ashes was terrifyingly uncertain. But as she stood in her apartment looking out at the city that had once seemed so full of promise, she felt not fear but a sense of calm resolve. She had been a victim, but now she was a warrior, and she was ready for the fight. The final showdown was no longer a matter of if, but when, and it was going to be spectacular. The day of Remy's return was a study in orchestrated calm. Arabella spent the morning at a prenatal yoga class, a picture of serenity that belied the storm raging within her. She moved through the poses, her breath steady, her focus absolute. She was no longer the fragile, heartbroken woman who had wept in the Hamptons garden. She was a woman on the brink of battle, her mind clear, her purpose unwavering. Remy's flight was scheduled to land at JFK at 3:00 p.m. At 3:15, as his town car was likely speeding towards Manhattan, Bellamy Dunn pressed send. An email with the subject line, "Urgent Emergency Board Meeting," regarding the future of Dunn Enterprises was dispatched to every member of the board. Attached was the damning memorandum of understanding, a clear and irrefutable blueprint of Remy's betrayal. The email also contained a concise, scathingly professional summary of his financial malfeasance compiled by David Chen and vetted by a team of forensic accountants Bellamy had hired. There was no mention of his affair, no hint of the personal drama. This was a corporate execution, clean and precise. The email concluded with a formal motion co-sponsored by Bellamy Dunn and two of the most influential board members to convene at 9:00 a.m. the following morning to vote on the immediate termination of Remy Dunn's contract as CEO, citing gross misconduct and dereliction of fiduciary duty. The fallout was instantaneous. A flurry of reply-all emails confirmed the board's unanimous assent. The trap was set. Arabella was waiting for him when he walked into the penthouse. He looked tanned and relaxed, the picture of a man who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. He dropped his briefcase, a triumphant smile on his face, and moved to embrace her. "I'm back, my love," he said, his voice smooth as silk. Arabella allowed the embrace, her body stiff, her heart a block of ice. "Welcome home, Remy," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. He pulled back, his smile faltering as he registered her coldness for the first time. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it the baby?" "The baby is fine," she said, stepping away from him. "I, however, am not." A flicker of confusion, then annoyance crossed his face. "Arabella, don't be like this. I told you I'd make it up to you. The trip was a massive success. I'm about to close a merger that will double the company's value." A merger with Laura Vance. Arabella asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The color drained from Remy's face. He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, the confident facade crumbling to reveal the panicked man beneath. How do you know that name? Oh, I know a lot of things, Remy, she said, a bitter smile touching her lips. I know you didn't go to Singapore for a 9-figure acquisition. I know you went there for a romantic getaway with your mistress. I know you canceled our daughter's baby shower so you could propose to her. I have the video, by the way. The restaurant lighting was quite flattering. Remy staggered back as if she had physically struck him. He looked around the room, his eyes wild as if searching for an escape route. Arabella, I can explain. Can you? She interrupted, her voice rising with the fury she had suppressed for so long. Can you explain the millions of dollars of company funds you funneled into her business? Can you explain the prenuptial agreement you signed with her? Can you explain how you were planning to announce your new engagement the day after you divorced me? Leaving your pregnant wife and your own child with nothing. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the last remnants of his composure. He was speechless. His lies exposed his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. It was then that his phone began to buzz incessantly. He glanced at the screen, his eyes widening in horror. It was his work phone. The board members, the executives. The deluge of emails and messages had begun. He was being summoned. What have you done? He whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Me? Arabella laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. I didn't do anything, Remy. You did this. You underestimated me. You underestimated your mother. You thought we were just women accessories to your brilliant life. You were wrong. He sank onto one of the expensive white sofas, his head in his hands. The self-made millionaire, the titan of Wall Street, looked like a broken man. The empire he had built on ambition and deceit was about to be taken from him. My mother, he croaked. She's in on this. She led the charge, Arabella said, taking a grim satisfaction in his despair. She's the one who called the emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. You should probably prepare a speech, though I doubt it will do you any good. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. Arabella, please. We can fix this. Don't let them do this to me. I'll give you anything you want. The penthouse, a settlement. Just call it off. It was pathetic. The man who had been ready to discard her without a second thought was now begging for her help. What I want, Remy, she said, her voice cold and final, is a divorce. I want you out of my life and out of my daughter's life. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow with the terms, and they will be non-negotiable. She turned and walked towards the bedroom, leaving him sitting amidst the ruins of his life. She packed a bag, her movements calm and deliberate. She was leaving the gilded cage for good. As she walked past him on her way to the door, she paused. By the way, she said, looking down at him, my mother-in-law threw me a baby shower. While you were in Singapore proposing to your mistress. It was at the Hamptons estate. It was beautiful. All our real friends and family were there. We didn't miss you at all. She saw the final flicker of hope die in his eyes. It was a cruel final twist of the knife, and she didn't regret it for a second. She walked out of the penthouse and didn't look back. The board meeting the next morning was by all accounts a bloodbath. Remy, disheveled and defeated, had tried to defend himself, but the evidence was overwhelming. The vote was unanimous. He was stripped of his title, his power, and his office, escorted from the building by security like a common criminal. The board, in a move of strategic genius, appointed Bellamy Dunn as interim CEO, a decision that was met with overwhelming support from investors and employees alike. The matriarch had reclaimed her son's throne. The divorce was swift and brutal. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud and adultery, Remy had no choice but to accept Arabella's terms. She got the penthouse a financial settlement that would ensure she and her daughter were secure for life, and most importantly, she got sole custody. Remy was granted limited supervised visitation rights, a humiliating blow for a man whose ego was his most prized possession. Laura Vance, seeing that her golden goose had been cooked, disappeared from the scene as quickly as she had appeared, the sham merger agreement null and void. The last Arabella heard, she was facing her own shareholder lawsuits. 2 months later, Arabella gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. She named her Bellamy. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. The gilded cage was replaced by a warm, loving home. Arabella sold the penthouse, finding a charming brownstone in a family-friendly neighborhood. She went back to work at the gallery, her passion for art rekindled. Her daughter was her world, a constant source of joy and wonder. Bellamy Dunn, the formidable CEO, proved to be an even more formidable grandmother. She doted on her granddaughter, her love a fierce protective shield. The alliance forged in betrayal had softened into a deep, abiding friendship. They were an unconventional family, 2 strong women and a baby girl bound together by the shared experience of having loved and lost the same man. Remy became a ghost in their lives, a cautionary tale. He faded from the society pages, a fallen star. Arabella would sometimes hear whispers of his attempts to start a new company, but he was a pariah in the business world, a man whose reputation was irrevocably tarnished. He had lost everything. His company, his fortune, his family, all for a fleeting obsession. He had canceled a baby shower, and in doing so, he had canceled his own life. Arabella had learned a hard lesson. She had learned that fairy tales can be built on foundations of lies and that Prince Charming can be a villain in disguise. But she had also learned that she was stronger than she ever thought possible. She had found her own power, her own voice, and in the end, she had gotten something far more valuable than a millionaire husband or a lavish party. She had gotten her freedom, her self-respect, and a love in her daughter that was real and true and unconditional. And that was a happily ever after that no amount of money could buy. The story of Arabella Dunn is a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest betrayals can lead to the most profound liberations. It's a testament to the strength of a woman who refused to be a victim and the fierce loyalty of a mother who would move heaven and earth for her family. If this story of deception, resilience, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up to show your support. Don't forget to share it with someone who loves a story of sweet, sweet revenge. The clinking of champagne glasses usually marks a celebration, but at the Sterling family's annual foundation dinner, it became the sound of a life shattering. In front of New York's high society billionaire patriarch, a man who seemingly had it all raised his glass. But the woman he toasted wasn't his wife of 25 years, the mother of his children who had built his empire alongside him. It was a woman half her age, a stranger to them all. What followed was not just a scandal, but a war. A war for a name, a fortune, and a family. And by the next day, the battle lines would be drawn in the most shocking way imaginable. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a symphony of hushed murmurs and the gentle clinking of silverware against fine china. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped light onto the assembled guests, a veritable who's who of New York's philanthropic and financial elite. At the center of it all, at the head of the most prominent table, sat the Sterling family. They were the sun around which this glittering solar system of wealth and influence revolved. At the head of the table, radiating an aura of untouchable power, was Richard Sterling. At 55, he was a man carved from granite and ambition, with a mane of silver-streaked dark hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was a self-made titan of industry, a man who had clawed his way from the grimy streets of Hell's Kitchen to the pinnacle of Manhattan's real estate world. His company Sterling Holdings owned a significant portion of the city's skyline, and his name was synonymous with audacious deals and ruthless success. He was a king in his kingdom, and tonight was his coronation. The annual Sterling Foundation Gala was the jewel in his philanthropic crown, a night where he gave back a fraction of his immense fortune with the kind of ostentatious generosity that only the truly wealthy can afford. Beside him, a study in quiet elegance and strained composure, was his wife, Catherine Sterling. At 50, she was still a breathtaking woman with classic patrician features, hair the color of spun gold, and eyes a startling shade of sapphire. She was born into old money, a scion of the prestigious Davenport family, and she had brought to their marriage a pedigree and a social grace that Richard, for all his billions, could never have acquired on his own. She was the perfect corporate wife. The silent partner who had smoothed his rough edges, hosted his endless dinners, and raised their 2 children while he conquered the world. She wore a deep emerald gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, a cascade of diamonds at her throat that had been a 25th anniversary gift from Richard. A gift she was beginning to realize that felt more like a severance package with each passing day. The chasm that had opened between them over the past few years was a silent gaping wound, a truth they both acknowledged but never dared to speak aloud. Across from them sat their children, the products of this gilded cage. 24-year-old Liam was the heir apparent, a younger, softer version of his father. He had Richard's ambition but lacked his killer instinct, a fact that was a constant source of friction between them. Liam, ever the dutiful son, had joined Sterling Holdings after graduating from Wharton, but he felt more like a highly paid subordinate than a future leader. He was handsome, charming, and desperate for his father's approval, a commodity that Richard dispensed with miserly reluctance. Next to Liam was his younger sister, 21-year-old Chloe. She was the family's resident firebrand, a passionate and idealistic art history major at Columbia, who viewed her father's world with a mixture of disdain and reluctant dependence. Chloe had her mother's beauty, but her father's defiant spirit, a combination that made her both captivating and perpetually at odds with her family's expectations. She loved her father, but she loathed what he represented, the cold, calculating world of money and power that she saw as a corrupting force. The dinner had been a carefully orchestrated performance, a series of speeches praising Richard's Midas touch and his supposed magnanimity. Catherine had played her part flawlessly, smiling, nodding, and exuding an air of serene pride as she listened to the endless litany of her husband's accomplishments. But beneath the surface, a cold dread was coiling in her stomach. She had seen the subtle shifts in Richard's behavior over the past year, the late nights he claimed were business meetings, the secretive phone calls he took in his study, the apathetic distance that had replaced the warmth in his eyes. She had suspected, of course. A woman always knows. But she had clung to a desperate hope that she was wrong, that the foundation they had built together was strong enough to withstand the tremors of his midlife crisis. The main course had been cleared, and the waiters were now moving with silent efficiency, refilling champagne glasses for the final toast of the evening. This was Richard's moment, the culmination of the night's adulation. He was expected to deliver a heartfelt speech thanking his supporters, his colleagues, and, of course, his loving family. He was expected to play the part of the benevolent patriarch, the man who had everything and was grateful for it. Richard rose from his chair, a glass of Dom Perignon in his hand. A hush fell over the ballroom as all eyes turned to him. He basked in the attention, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He looked every inch the conquering hero, the master of the universe. He began his speech with the usual platitudes, his voice a deep, confident baritone that resonated with power. He thanked the board of the foundation, the generous donors, the tireless staff. He spoke of his vision for the future, of the legacy he intended to build. Catherine watched him, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She had heard this speech 100 times before in 100 different ballrooms. It was a well-rehearsed script designed to charm and impress. But tonight something was different. There was a reckless, almost cruel glint in his eyes that she had never seen before. A sense of impending doom washed over her, so strong that she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Liam and Chloe were also watching their father, their expressions a mixture of pride and apprehension. They too sensed that something was amiss. The air was thick with unspoken tension. A fragile silence stretched taut over the glittering room. Richard paused, taking a slow sip of his champagne. He let the silence hang in the air for a dramatic beat, his eyes sweeping across the sea of expectant faces. And then he did the unthinkable. His gaze shifted, moving past Catherine, past his children, to a table in the corner of the room. It was a table of lower-level executives from Sterling Holdings, the kind of people who were usually seated in the back, far from the center of power. But tonight, one of them was about to be thrust into the spotlight. "But there is one more person I need to thank," Richard said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, almost caressing tone. "A person who has brought a new light into my life, a new passion, a new inspiration." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Catherine's blood ran cold. She followed his gaze, her eyes landing on a young woman seated at the corner table. The woman was beautiful in a way that was both obvious and slightly vulgar. She had long, raven-black hair, a voluptuous figure poured into a tight scarlet dress, and a look of triumphant arrogance on her face. Catherine had never seen her before, but she knew with a certainty that was as sharp and painful as a shard of glass in her heart who this woman was. This was her replacement. "To Ella," Richard declared, raising his glass high, "for showing me what it truly means to be alive." The name hung in the air, a poisoned dart that found its mark in the heart of the Sterling family. Ella. It was a name that would be seared into their memories forever. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with shock, with outrage, with 1,000 unspoken questions. The guests stared, mouths agape, their eyes darting from Richard to Catherine to the scarlet woman who was now preening under the spotlight. The carefully constructed facade of the Sterling family had been shattered, and the raw, ugly truth was now laid bare for all to see. For Catherine, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The chandeliers above her blurred into a smear of light. The faces around her became distorted masks of pity and morbid curiosity. The air was thick and heavy, and she felt as if she were drowning. She looked at Richard, at the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, and saw a stranger. His face was flushed with a mixture of arrogance and defiance, his eyes shining with a feverish light. He was not just acknowledging his affair, he was celebrating it, flaunting it in the most public and humiliating way possible. Liam was the first to react. He shot to his feet, his face pale with fury. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He looked from his father to the woman in red, a look of pure loathing on his face. Chloe was frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with horror. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked at her mother, her expression a silent plea for this nightmare to end. But Richard was unfazed. He simply smiled, a cold, dismissive smile that did not reach his eyes. "Sit down, Liam," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't concern me?" Liam's voice rose, attracting the attention of the surrounding tables. "You're humiliating my mother in front of the entire city, and it doesn't concern me." The scarlet woman Ella seemed to revel in the drama. She stood up, a smug smile playing on her lips, and raised her own glass in a mock toast to Catherine. It was a calculated act of cruelty, a declaration of victory. That was the final straw for Catherine. The numbness that had enveloped her began to recede, replaced by a white-hot fury. She rose from her chair with a grace and dignity that belied the turmoil raging within her. She did not look at Richard. She did not look at Ella. She looked at her children, her eyes filled with a strength and resolve that they had never seen before. Without a word, she turned and walked away from the table. She moved with a regal composure, her head held high, her back straight. The emerald gown shimmered around her like a suit of armor. She did not run. She did not cry. She simply walked with a purpose and a finality that was more powerful than any shouted words or shed tears. The entire ballroom watched her go, a silent collective witness to the public execution of a marriage. The murmurs started, then a rising tide of whispers and speculation. The Sterling Foundation Gala would be remembered not for its philanthropy, but for the scandal that had erupted at its heart. As Catherine walked through the grand lobby of the Pierre, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The life she had known for 25 years was over. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by a cruel and reckless stranger. The future she had envisioned was a barren wasteland. She stepped out into the cool night air, the sounds of the city a jarring contrast to the suffocating silence of the ballroom. A lone tear finally escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness, but of rage. Richard had declared war, and Catherine Sterling, the quiet, elegant wife, was about to become a warrior. The battle for the Sterling name, for her children, for her very identity, had just begun. The limousine ride back to the Sterlings' palatial Fifth Avenue penthouse was a study in suffocating silence. The air, usually filled with the comfortable chatter of a family returning from a successful event, was now thick with a toxic mixture of shock, anger, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. Catherine sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the blur of city lights outside the tinted windows. She was a statue carved from ice, her face a mask of impenetrable composure. The single tear she had shed outside the hotel was the only outward sign of the tempest raging within her. Liam sat opposite her, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle throbbed in his cheek. He kept clenching and unclenching his fists, his knuckles white. He was a coiled spring of impotent fury, his eyes darting between his mother's stoic profile and the empty seat beside her, the seat where his father should have been. Richard, in a final act of brazen disrespect, had left the gala with Ella, their laughter echoing in the marble lobby as they disappeared into a waiting sports car, leaving his family to navigate the fallout of his public betrayal. Chloe was curled into the corner of the limousine, her small frame racked with silent sobs. She had her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The sound of her weeping was a heartbreaking counterpoint to the tense silence, a raw, unfiltered expression of the pain they were all feeling. She was the family's emotional barometer, and right now she was indicating a storm of epic proportions. The doorman at their building, a man who had greeted them with a deferential smile for over a decade, averted his eyes as they stepped out of the car. The news, it seemed, had already traveled faster than the speed of light in the hyper-connected world of Manhattan's elite. The scandal was already a raging wildfire, and they were at the epicenter of the inferno. The penthouse, which had always been a symbol of their success and a sanctuary from the outside world, now felt like a gilded cage, its opulent furnishings and priceless art mocking them with their cold, indifferent beauty. The silence that had filled the car followed them into the apartment, amplifying the cavernous space and making it feel even more empty and desolate. Catherine walked directly to the bar, her movements precise and deliberate. She poured herself a generous measure of brandy, her hand steady. She took a long, slow sip, the fiery liquid a welcome burn in her throat. She needed its warmth to combat the icy chill that had settled deep in her bones. Liam finally broke the silence, his voice a raw, ragged whisper. "I can't believe him. I can't believe he would do that. To you. To us." Chloe lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "How could he? Mom! In front of everyone! Who is that woman?" Catherine turned to face her children, her expression softening for the first time that night. She saw their pain, their confusion, their shattered illusions, and a fierce protective love surged through her. They were the only thing that mattered now. "Her name apparently is Ella," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And as for who she is, she's a mistake. A very public, very expensive mistake that your father has just made." She took another sip of her brandy, her mind already working, calculating, planning. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. She had been a CEO's wife for 25 years. She knew how to strategize. She knew how to fight. "What are we going to do?" Liam asked, looking to his mother for guidance, his anger giving way to a sense of helplessness. He was used to his father being in control, making the decisions. Now that foundation had been ripped out from under him. "First," Catherine said, her voice firm. "We are going to stick together. Your father has made his choice. He has chosen to align himself with that woman. He has drawn a line in the sand. Now we must draw our own." She walked over to the large picture window that overlooked Central Park, the city lights a glittering tapestry below. She had stood at this window countless times looking out at the empire she had helped Richard build. Now she was looking at a battlefield. "He thinks he's won," she said, her voice a low, dangerous murmur. "He thinks he can just discard me, discard us without any consequences. He has underestimated me. He has underestimated his own children." She turned back to them, her sapphire eyes burning with a newfound fire. "This is not just about a marriage anymore. This is about our family. It's about our name. It's about everything we've built. And I will not let him destroy it." The next morning, the city awoke to the Sterling scandal splashed across the front page of every tabloid and news site. "Sterling's Scarlet Night," screamed the headline of the New York Post, accompanied by a grainy photo of Richard and Ella leaving the gala, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. The article was a salacious mix of facts and speculation detailing Richard's public toast, Catherine's dignified exit, and Ella's mysterious identity. She was painted as a young, ambitious marketing executive from Sterling Holdings, a vixen who had sunk her claws into the billionaire tycoon. The phones at the penthouse began to ring incessantly, a cacophony of calls from concerned friends, gossiping acquaintances, and reporters hungry for a quote. Catherine instructed the housekeeper to unplug them. She needed to think, to plan, to prepare for the war that was coming. She called a meeting with her personal lawyer, a shrewd and formidable woman named Jessica Davenport, who also happened to be her cousin. Jessica arrived within the hour, her face a mask of grim determination. She was a bulldog in a Chanel suit, and she was fiercely loyal to Catherine. They sat in the formal living room, the scene of so many happy family gatherings, now transformed into a war room. Catherine, with a clarity that surprised even herself, laid out the events of the previous night, her voice calm and measured. She did not cry. She did not rage. She presented the facts with the detached precision of a surgeon. Jessica listened intently, her pen flying across her legal pad. When Catherine had finished, she looked up, her expression a mixture of sympathy and steely resolve. "He's a fool, Catherine. A monumental, arrogant fool, but he's a dangerous fool. We need to move quickly and decisively." "I want a divorce," Catherine said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "But I want more than that. I helped him build that company. My family's money was the seed that started it all. My social connections opened doors for him that would have otherwise been bolted shut. I am not just his wife. I am his partner. And I will not be discarded like a piece of outdated furniture." Jessica nodded, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Under New York law, marital assets are subject to equitable distribution. And we will argue that your contributions to the marriage and to the business were significant. We will go after half of everything, Catherine. The company, the properties, the art collection, everything." "Good," Catherine said. "But there's more. I want to protect the children. Liam's position at the company, Chloe's trust fund. He will try to use them as leverage against me. I know he will. We'll file for an immediate injunction to freeze all marital assets," Jessica said. "That will prevent him from moving money around or making any major financial decisions without court approval. We'll also petition for temporary spousal and child support. We'll hit him hard and fast before he has time to fully comprehend what's happening." While Catherine was plotting her legal strategy, Liam was facing his own battle. He had gone to the office against his mother's advice, determined to confront his father. He found Richard in his corner office, a vast expanse of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the city. He was on the phone, laughing, a sound that made Liam's blood boil. Ella was perched on the edge of his desk, looking as if she owned the place. She was wearing a dress that was even more revealing than the one from the night before, and she was sipping a latte from a Sterling Holdings mug. When Richard saw Liam, his expression hardened. He ended the call and stood up, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for a fight. "What do you want, Liam?" he asked, his voice cold and dismissive. "I want to know what you were thinking." Liam said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I want to know how you could do that to Mom." Richard scoffed, a look of pure arrogance on his face. "Your mother and I have been unhappy for years. It was a charade, a business arrangement. It's time for me to be happy. Ella makes me happy." Ella smiled a smug, triumphant smile. "Your father is a passionate man, Liam. He needs a woman who can keep up with him." The condescending tone, the casual disrespect, it was too much for Liam to bear. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You've just destroyed this family." "Don't be so dramatic," Richard said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a divorce. It happens every day. Your mother will be well taken care of. You and Chloe will be fine. Nothing has to change." "Nothing has to change." Liam's voice rose to a shout. "You just publicly humiliated the woman who has stood by you for 25 years, and you think nothing has to change. You've lost your mind." "Watch your tone, Liam," Richard warned, his eyes narrowing. "You're an employee of this company, and I am still your father." "No," Liam said, a sudden chilling clarity descending upon him. "You're not. Not anymore. The man I called my father wouldn't have done this. He wouldn't have been so cruel, so selfish." He took a step back, his decision made in that moment of painful disillusionment. "I quit." He said the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I will not work for you. I will not be a part of this circus." He turned and walked out of the office, ignoring Richard's bellow of his name. He walked past the curious stares of the other employees, past the whispers and the pitying looks. He walked out of Sterling Holdings, the company he had once believed was his birthright, and he did not look back. Meanwhile, Chloe was waging her own more subtle war. She had spent the morning on the phone, not with friends, but with the trustees of the Davenport Family Foundation, the charitable organization established by her maternal grandparents. She was a junior board member, a position she had always taken seriously. She knew the inner workings of the foundation, and she knew where the pressure points were. She spoke with her great-aunt, the formidable matriarch of the Davenport clan, a woman who had never fully approved of Richard Sterling. Chloe, with a passion and eloquence that belied her years, painted a vivid picture of Richard's public betrayal of his cruelty, of his disrespect for the family name. She spoke not just as a grieving daughter, but as a Davenport defending the honor of their lineage. By the time she hung up the phone, the wheels were in motion. The Davenport family, a powerful and influential force in their own right, was mobilizing. They were cutting ties with Richard, both personal and professional. They were withdrawing their support from his ventures, closing doors that had once been held wide open. They were in their own quiet, devastating way declaring war on Richard Sterling. When Liam arrived back at the penthouse, his face pale but resolute, he found his mother and sister in the living room. He told them what he had done, that he had quit his job, that he had walked away from his father. Catherine looked at him, a fierce pride in her eyes. "You did the right thing, Liam," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You chose your family. You chose your integrity." Chloe then told them about her own conversations, about the Davenport family's response. A small, grim smile touched Catherine's lips. The battle lines were being drawn, and she was not fighting alone. The next day, the family gathered in the living room, a united front against the storm that was about to break. Jessica arrived with a mountain of paperwork, the first salvos in their legal war. The divorce petition, the injunction to freeze assets, the request for spousal support. It was all there ready to be filed. As they were reviewing the documents, the doorman buzzed up. "Mr. Sterling is on his way up," he announced, his voice strained. A cold silence fell over the room. Catherine looked at her children, her expression unreadable. "Let him come," she said, her voice calm. "It's time we had a family meeting." Richard strode into the apartment a few minutes later, his face a thunderous mask of rage. He was not used to being defied. He was not used to his authority being questioned. He was a king who had just discovered that his kingdom was in revolt. He glared at Jessica, at the pile of legal documents on the coffee table. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "It's a divorce petition, Richard," Catherine said, her voice as cold and clear as ice. "And an injunction to freeze all our assets. You will not be spending another dime of our money on that woman." Richard's face contorted with fury. He turned to Liam. "And you pathetic, ungrateful whelp, you walk out on my company, on your future." "I walked out on you," Liam corrected, his voice steady. "I chose my mother. I chose my family." Richard then turned his wrath on Chloe. "And you went crying to your ancient relatives, turning them against me." "I told them the truth," Chloe said, her voice unwavering. "You're the one who brought this on yourself." Richard looked from one defiant face to another, a dawning realization in his eyes. He had expected them to crumble. He had expected them to be weak, to be dependent on him. He had never imagined that they would stand together, that they would fight back. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "You think you can win this? You think you can take me on? I built this empire. I am Richard Sterling." "And I am Catherine Sterling," she said, her voice quiet but filled with an unshakable strength. "And these are our children. You made a choice, Richard. You chose her." She gestured vaguely in the direction of the city, a dismissive wave of her hand. "And now we have made our choice. We choose each other. We choose this family." The battle had been joined. The lines had been drawn. And in the opulent penthouse overlooking Central Park, the Sterling family minus its patriarch stood united, ready to face the storm. The next day had come, and the family had chosen. They had chosen her. They had chosen Catherine. They had chosen themselves. And Richard Sterling, the king who had so carelessly discarded his queen, was about to discover that he was no longer ruling a kingdom, but a wasteland of his own making. The war had just begun, and the casualties were yet to be counted. The weeks that followed the fateful dinner were a blur of legal maneuvering, public scrutiny, and a profound seismic shift in the Sterling family's universe. The battle that Richard had so arrogantly ignited was now a full-blown war fought not on a battlefield of mud and steel, but in the sterile conference rooms of law firms, the gossip columns of the city's tabloids, and the hushed, judgmental circles of New York's elite. Richard, accustomed to a world that bent to his will, was stunned by the ferocity and unity of the opposition. He had expected Catherine to be a weeping, broken woman, begging for a reconciliation or a quiet, generous settlement. He had expected his children to be petulant, but ultimately compliant, their dependence on his wealth a leash he could easily tug. He had fundamentally misjudged them, and that miscalculation was proving to be a costly one. The injunction freezing their assets was the first major blow. It was a strategic masterstroke by Jessica Davenport, a legal chokehold that brought Richard's freewheeling financial life to a screeching halt. Suddenly, every major transaction, every transfer of funds required court approval. His plan to set Ella up in a lavish multi-million-dollar condo to shower her with the kind of extravagant gifts that would solidify her position as the new woman in his life was abruptly thwarted. He was a king with a temporarily locked treasury, and the humiliation was exquisite. He retaliated, as was his nature, with brute force. He assembled a legal team of the most ruthless, high-priced sharks in the city, lawyers known for their scorched earth tactics. They filed a counter-petition accusing Catherine of being a gold digger, a woman who had lived a life of luxury on his dime and was now trying to bleed him dry. They painted her as a cold, calculating woman who had been emotionally distant for years, a wife in name only. It was a smear campaign designed to wound and intimidate. But Catherine, buoyed by the unwavering support of her children, and the formidable Jessica, refused to be cowed. She had spent 25 years in Richard's shadow, her own intelligence and strength sublimated to his ego. Now that shadow was gone, and she was stepping into the light, discovering a resilience she never knew she possessed. The public narrative which Richard had assumed he could control was also turning against him. His brazen toast to his mistress had been a public relations disaster, a display of such breathtaking arrogance that it had alienated even his most ardent supporters. The story of Catherine's dignified exit of her children's loyalty had captured the city's imagination. She was cast as the wronged woman, the graceful matriarch defending her family's honor. He was the villain, the callous billionaire who had traded his loyal wife for a younger, flashier model. The other woman, Ella, was also finding that her victory was not as sweet as she had imagined. She had craved the spotlight, the legitimacy that came with being on the arm of a man like Richard Sterling. But the spotlight was now a harsh, unforgiving glare. She was vilified in the press, branded a homewrecker and a social climber. The wives of Richard's friends and business associates, women who had once been her colleagues or superiors, now looked at her with undisguised contempt. She was a pariah, a scarlet woman in a city that prized loyalty and discretion above all else. The war for the Sterling Empire was also being fought on a more personal and perhaps more painful front. Richard, enraged by his children's defiance, began to turn the screws. He cut off their credit cards, a petty act of retaliation that was more symbolic than financially devastating. He sent a curt formal letter to Chloe informing her that he would no longer be contributing to her tuition at Columbia. He tried to bar Liam from the family's country home in the Hamptons, a place filled with a lifetime of memories. But for every move he made, Catherine had a countermove. She used her own personal funds, a substantial inheritance from her parents that Richard had never been able to touch, to cover Chloe's tuition and ensure that her children's lives were not disrupted. She reminded Richard through Jessica that the Hamptons house was a marital asset and he had no legal right to bar his own son from the property. The children, for their part, were discovering their own strengths in the crucible of this family crisis. Liam, freed from the suffocating pressure of his father's expectations, began to explore his own interests. He had always had a passion for sustainable architecture, an idea that Richard had dismissed as tree-hugging nonsense. Now he started taking online courses, networking with people in the field, and even sketching out plans for his own small, eco-friendly development company. He was finding a purpose that was entirely his own, a sense of self-worth that was not tied to the Sterling name or his father's approval. Chloe, always the family's conscience, channeled her anger and hurt into her activism. She became even more involved in her art history studies, focusing on the role of female artists who had been overlooked or marginalized by their male counterparts. She saw a parallel in her mother's story, and it fueled her passion. She organized a student art exhibition on campus, showcasing the work of up-and-coming female artists, and dedicated it to her mother. It was a small act of defiance, but it was a powerful statement of her loyalty and her values. The standoff continued for months, a tense and bitter war of attrition. The legal bills mounted, the emotional toll grew, and the chasm within the family deepened into an unbridgeable canyon. Richard, isolated and increasingly paranoid, became more and more dependent on Ella. But the foundations of their relationship, built on a reckless impulse and a shared desire for a certain kind of lifestyle, were beginning to show cracks. Ella was growing impatient. The life of a pampered billionaire's mistress was not materializing as she had envisioned. The frozen assets meant that the shopping sprees, the lavish trips, the jewelry were all on hold. She was living in a luxury hotel, a gilded cage, but she was not the mistress of a Fifth Avenue penthouse. She was a woman in limbo, and the constant public scrutiny was beginning to wear on her. She had wanted to be a queen, but she was beginning to feel more like a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. The turning point came during a deposition for the divorce case. It was the first time that Catherine and Richard had been in the same room since that fateful night at the penthouse. The air in the conference room was thick with animosity, a palpable living thing. Richard's lawyers, true to their reputation, came out swinging. They questioned Catherine about her spending habits, her social life, her role as a mother. They tried to paint her as a frivolous, detached woman who had contributed nothing to the marriage but her pedigree. Catherine, cool and composed, answered their questions with a quiet dignity that infuriated them. She had her own secret weapon, a collection of meticulously kept diaries that she had maintained for 25 years. They were a detailed record of her life with Richard, a chronicle of the dinner parties she had hosted, the business trips she had organized, the clients she had wooed, the personal sacrifices she had made. When it was Jessica's turn to question Richard, she was relentless. She presented him with evidence of his lavish spending on Ella, of his attempts to hide assets, of his emotional cruelty to his wife and children. Richard, under oath, was forced to admit to his infidelity, to his lies, to his callous disregard for his family. But the most devastating blow came when Jessica began to question him about the early days of his company. She produced financial records, old loan agreements, and personal letters that Catherine had saved. She laid out in painstaking detail how the initial seed money for Sterling Holdings had come not from Richard's own pocket, but from a trust fund established by Catherine's grandfather. She showed how Catherine's family connections had secured him his first major development deal, a deal that had been the launching pad for his entire empire. Richard, for the first time in his life, was speechless. The narrative he had so carefully constructed, the myth of the self-made man, was crumbling around him. He was not just a philanderer, he was a fraud. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of his wife's money and her family's influence. The news of the deposition of the revelations about the origins of Richard's fortune sent shockwaves through the business community. His reputation, already tarnished, was now in tatters. His business partners began to distance themselves, his stock price wavered, and the empire he had built with such ruthless determination began to seem vulnerable. For Richard, it was the ultimate humiliation. He had lost his family, his reputation, and now he was in danger of losing his company. He was a king in a kingdom that was rapidly shrinking, his power and influence draining away like sand through his fingers. Ella, seeing the writing on the wall, made her move. She realized that the Sterling ship was taking on water and she had no intention of going down with it. She gave an exclusive tell-all interview to a tabloid magazine, painting herself as a victim, a naive young woman who had been seduced and manipulated by a powerful older man. She portrayed Richard as a Svengali figure, a man who had promised her the world and then left her with nothing. It was a calculated act of self-preservation, a final desperate attempt to salvage her own reputation at his expense. The interview was the final nail in Richard's coffin. He was now not just a villain, but a pathetic one. He was a man who had been outplayed by his wife, abandoned by his children, and now publicly betrayed by his mistress. He was alone, isolated in his glass and steel tower, a king with no subjects, no allies, and no one to blame but himself. In the end, he had no choice but to surrender. He agreed to a settlement that was far more generous to Catherine than anything he had ever imagined. She received a significant portion of his fortune, the Fifth Avenue penthouse, the Hamptons house, and a substantial stake in Sterling Holdings. It was not just a victory, it was a vindication. Catherine, Liam, and Chloe stood together on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the city that was once again theirs. The war was over. They were bruised, they were scarred, but they were whole. They had faced the storm and had emerged not unscathed but stronger, more united, and with a clearer sense of who they were and what they valued. Catherine Sterling, the woman who had been publicly discarded, had not just survived, she had triumphed. She had reclaimed her name, her fortune, and her family. She was no longer just the wife of a billionaire. She was the matriarch of a new Sterling dynasty, one built not on ruthless ambition and public spectacle, but on loyalty, integrity, and the enduring power of family. The battle had been won, not with a shout, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. And in the end, that had been the most powerful weapon of all. The aftermath of the Sterling divorce was as closely watched as the initial scandal, but for entirely different reasons. It became a story not of betrayal, but of reinvention. Catherine, now one of the wealthiest women in New York, did not retreat into a life of quiet luxury. Instead, she stepped into a new public role with a grace and purpose that surprised everyone except perhaps her children. She took her seat on the board of Sterling Holdings, not as a silent partner, but as an active and influential voice. Her knowledge of the company's history, her innate understanding of the city's social and political landscape, and her newfound confidence made her a formidable presence. She championed a new direction for the company, one that focused on sustainable development, community engagement, and ethical business practices. It was a vision that resonated with a new generation of investors and clients, and under her guidance the company began to regain its footing, its reputation slowly being rebuilt on a foundation of integrity rather than arrogance. Liam, with his mother's backing and a substantial investment from her settlement, launched his own company, Sterling Green. It was a small boutique firm specializing in environmentally conscious urban design. His first project was a low-income housing development in the Bronx, a building that incorporated green roofs, solar panels, and community gardens. It was a project that would have made his father scoff, but it earned Liam the respect of his peers and a sense of fulfillment that he had never found in the corporate world of Sterling Holdings. He was building something that was not just profitable but meaningful. Chloe, graduating from Columbia with honors, turned down lucrative job offers from major auction houses and galleries. Instead, she used a portion of her trust fund, now securely under her mother's control, to establish the Davenport Sterling Arts Foundation. Its mission was to provide grants and mentorship to emerging female artists, the very people she had championed in her student exhibition. She became a passionate and articulate advocate for the arts, a patron who was more interested in nurturing talent than in acquiring trophies. The Sterling family, once a symbol of fractured wealth and public scandal, was now being redefined.